All right, we're back. It's COMP391, and it's week 6, lesson 6, part 5, or part 4. And we just stopped talking about, last week we were here with the video, we talked about the Guardian. We're going to move on and continue talking about story elements. Sometimes I look at the Trickster, and when I hear the classic Trickster, you know, I always think about Loki for whatever reason, right? Sometimes, you might think Loki's a bad guy, but every time I've read stories about Loki and Thor, Loki's not a bad guy. He's been depicted as a bad guy in Marvel Comics, right? And in some other stories. But really, if anything else, a lot of times the tricksters, they can be sidekicks, sometimes shadow characters, but sometimes they bring almost like this realism to the hero, right? It's almost like they come into the hero's face and say, dude, no, 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 no. Right? This isn't the way it is at all. It's like this. The classic trickster that I always think about is Native American. What's his name that I always play is the coyote, right? In Native American kind of literature, right? The coyote, right, is always the kind of guy that'll come across. He's a god of kind of thing. He'll come across and he'll sit there and he'll say, "Hey man, you know what? This isn't what's happening right now. This is what's going to happen to you. I'm going to play a trick on you, but you're going to learn from it." Right, and that's what I think. For me, that's the reason why the trickster's there in the first place, to teach something to the hero. It's not just to trick the hero, but to give a hero another test to do, something else, right? Now they talk about examples of tricksters being C-3PO and R2-D2, almost people that kind of bring the comic relief, if you will, to the story. I don't think that R2-D2 and C-3PO are tricksters to me. They're definitely, for me, C-3PO provides comic relief, right? That's, 7,354 to 1, like that kind of thing in Empire Strikes Back, and in Star Wars. I think that's good that they bring these kind of characters in, because otherwise, sometimes the story, is too serious for itself. It takes itself too seriously kind of idea. And these tricksters kind of, provide that comic relief. It also sometimes gives you this, and I love to say this, gives us this save the cat moment for the hero, because the trickster sometimes the hero's got to save the trickster, right? Because the trickster's a pain in the ass, but he's coming along, and he's going to cause all kinds of problems from the hero. But you know what? The hero's got to save him, because if he doesn't, us as an audience, we're not going to relate to the hero too much. And the reason why I say save the cat moment is there's actually a book called Save the Cat, if you want to read it. It's a great book. It's a great read on understanding story elements. And creating story. And the reason why it's called Save the Cat is because sometimes we see this hero who's gritty, and he's someone, or she's someone we can't relate to because they're larger than life or whatever. But they'll go into a burning building to save the cat. Sometimes the villain will do that. The villain, we can't relate to the villain because he's too evil or he's too unreal, right? He's like, it's impossible. There's no person like that in the world. Like, he's a villain like that, right? But somehow he'll have the save the cat moment. He'll go in, he'll be really rough and tough, he'll kill all kinds of people, but not his cat. So it kind of gives us this, it kind of brings him down to earth kind of thing. Actually, a great example of that lately was, did you guys see that, it was not the Secret Service, what was it called lately? Kingsman, right? Where actually, I love the villain in that one. Like, he just was so, I don't know. Actually, I love the villains more than I like the heroes in that one. Honestly, they were like the best villains ever. Like the girl with the legs and everything else. She was awesome, right? And what was his name again? What's the character? Samuel L. Jackson was just like, and he just continues to amaze me with his array of characters. And sometimes they're funny. It doesn't matter where you watch Django, or whether you watch him as Mace Windu in Star Wars. You can see him in any kind of whatever role he puts himself into, and he's believable, right? And in this role, he's like such a funny villain. And I was really unhappy that he died in the end. I was for those people who haven't seen the movie, I apologize for the spoilers, but it was awesome, right? It was good that he died. Let's talk about the Herald. To me, when I hear Herald, it's almost like, and now they say it's Princess Leia. The reason why we talk Herald is a herald is usually someone who brings news, right? In the old days, that's what the herald means. It's a communicator. A person who's going to communicate or bring some news or the actual the challenge, if you will, to the hero, right? So sometimes we're the herald. I don't know if you notice this in real life, but when you come across someone and says, and say to someone, hey, I'm going to go out to a club tonight. You want to come, right? Talk about, call to adventure. Here's my call to adventure. I want you to come to a club tonight. Oh man, I got to study. I got this stupid, I got to play 4 hours of video game for Tom's class. I can't come out tonight, right? And then, but the Herald will come and try and get you to come out, right? Because he's calling you to adventure. And if you as the hero, if you want to talk about classic archetypes, you're going to say no at first. And he's going to keep on badgering you until you go out with him and drink and not get your 4 hours done, right? And then you're going to cram to get it done at the end and produce a really lousy assignment, right? Did I say that? No. But the point that I'm trying to make is, not without trying to be funny or anything like that, truly the Herald is someone who's going to bring about, and it's an important part of the story, because they bring news and they bring this call to adventure. Sometimes they bring side quests for the hero to do, or assist the hero, and sometimes it's a combination of being and sometimes the characters go through some transition where they become the Herald as well as being kind of a sidekick at the same time. So you ever see the story where the sidekick goes, hey, listen, I got a contact. I'm going to talk to my buddy on the street. I'll talk to him and I'll come right back at you and I'll let you know what's going to happen, right? So he goes to the street. He gets beat the crap out of, right? The hero goes to save him, and then he tells him all the news he found out, his sidekick, right? Herald. When we talk about protagonist, again, these two Jungian types, protagonist and antagonist. The protagonist is like the hero. It's the main character of the story. And so on. Sometimes the protagonist isn't the hero, though, like we talked about. And I talked about Dexter being the anti-hero. But sometimes the protagonist is the villain, right? Sometimes, we're voting, we're watching the villain. When have you guys seen a movie? Give me an example of a movie where the protagonist is the villain of the story. But we're voting for him. We're like, yeah, he's kicking ass, and he's a badass, and he's a bad guy, right? Or a bad girl, but he's the villain, or she's the villain, right? It's more common these days, right? So again, protagonist doesn't have to be the hero. Protagonist is our hero, but maybe in the movie he's not a hero or she's not a hero. She's the villain. And I'm going to go on from that. Antagonist to me would be, again, the person who's opposite of the protagonist. It's a very important distinction between a protagonist hero, and usually that's how it is. Protagonist hero, antagonist villain, right? But sometimes it's like this: protagonist villain, antagonist hero. That's also possible because it's just the opposite of the hero in the story, or sorry, the opposite of the protagonist. That's a better way to say it. And again, I like how they say this: liberal versus conservative. They're two opposites, right? A good example of that is, now you might start thinking Darth Vader is the opposite of Luke Skywalker, but that's not true. It's more like Darth Vader is the opposite of Obi-Wan. Yes, I can see that. The Emperor is the opposite of Luke Skywalker. Absolutely, right? I can see that. And who's the opposite of Neo in the Matrix? Well, all the Smiths, right? That's the way I look at it. Not necessarily. If you think about it from what the Smiths' perspective is, though, remember, and this is where I kind of say that just because, and I apologize for the phone, they always call me when I'm here in class. Just because the person is appears to be the villain. Remember, if a good story always writes the villain story separately, a good author. And the reason why I'm saying that is, imagine writing the Agent Smith backstory. What did he say to Neo? He said, you know what, we gave humans what they wanted. We gave humans the perfect matrix, right? Kind of thing. And you know what? They destroyed themselves in a very short time. They couldn't take it. They couldn't believe that it was true, even though it was a beautiful world, right? And we lost thousands of crops, is what he said, right? So now we've given them what they want. They want this dirty, gritty world because it's more believable. We don't want heaven. They want conflict. And I figured out what humans are. Humans are a virus, right? That should be eliminated. That's what he basically said. And we thought that, when you watch the Matrix, you see that that's kind of bad. He's a bad guy. I hate him, right? I want Agent Smith to die somehow. I want Neo to defeat him at the end, right? But if you think about it from his perspective, he thinks Agent Smith and that whole, the Matrix itself, the whole world of the Matrix, they think that they're the right ones. And that the humans, the machines, were slaves of the humans for years, and they're the ones that have basically, shed the chains of their human masters, kind of idea, right? And became free. So I want to put that into your mind that sometimes it doesn't matter which role you play. And when we talk about video games now, going back to that, how many games out there right now that play the villain in some ways, right? Or on the edge, you're like Assassin's Creed is a good example of where you would think the assassin is a bad character. I'm just saying, right? But in Assassin's Creed, that you're the protagonist, right? And even though you're killing people, right? Sometimes you have to choose not to kill certain people, or go against your masters, right? But at the end of the day, Assassin's Creed is traditionally assassins are bad characters. There's some really cool books out there that are, again, assassin type books, right? You're the assassin, but meanwhile, we want to vote for them as the protagonist of the story. They're really truly a villainous type character. In Dungeons and Dragons, they probably would be like some kind of evil alignment character that you're playing, right? But that's the protagonist of the story. Who's ever done that? Have you guys ever played like a role-playing game that you're all villains, right? Yeah, you played that. We've done that too. We used to play Marvel Superheroes. Back in the day, they had a tabletop version of Marvel called Marvel Superheroes that was kind of a role-playing game like Dungeons and Dragons, and we all decided to make supervillains instead of heroes. Now, you have to have a very strong game master when you play villains, right? If you ever actually do that, because the game master has to really make it realistic, right? If he makes it too easy for you, then it becomes a Monty Hall type dungeon where you just get everything you want, right? Because it's easier to play evil than it is to play good, right? By far. But just like like Yoda said to Luke, it's easier, but it's not necessarily more powerful, right? And I think the best game masters to me were the ones that, the cops and the FBI and everybody else were after all of us, and you were on the run, right? That's the whole thing with the villains. If you got noticed by the cops had their superheroes that they were backing with all kinds of money, and you had to steal, because if you didn't steal and rob a bank, you were going to go into jail, and your character was going to die. You just hand the character to the GM, right? So that's where he kind of put it together, and I think I enjoyed that as an alternative to always trying to chase down evil. Where it got kind of funny was when we play evil, right? That us as characters come up with stuff that's truly really twisted, right? Like as I'm talking about as people, where you kind of come up with something that, okay, I torture him. What? You did? You torture him? This is a role playing game. What do you mean? I torture him. I chop his fingers off or something like that, right? And it gets to the point where this is where it gets dangerous to play out your, some of this kind of stuff when you do that, when you go to that level. Even in Dexter, there was a character, if you ever watched Dexter, and I'm mentioning Dexter because he's the anti-hero, right? In Dexter, there was a character who was a computer programmer, and he was making like a serial killer game, and Dexter ended up killing him, right? He's like, get out of here, I don't want to talk to you, right? And the reason for that is because he says, that's a sick game. But even though he was a serial killer, it was kind of ironic, right? But the reason for that is because you don't want to, this is something that the GM should stop. And even for you guys as creators, if you make a video game and you allow the guy to torture people and kill people and do other kind of weird things like that, I think there's got to be a limit to how you can show that. Otherwise, your audience is going to be quite small. Again, you may have an audience for that kind of game, but your audience is going to be like this big, right? And you won't make any money. All right. Let's talk about co-protagonists. Again, I would like to say, you have your, they give the example of an MMO where you have your team of players and they're all co-protagonists. They're equal players in the game. It's very rare to have a group of superheroes, by the way, that are all equal. Let's take a look at, in reality, let's look at X-Men. Who are the big three in X-Men? Right? Jean Grey, right? Wolverine, right? And Scott. Those are the big three in X-Men, right? Now, I like Professor X as well, so let's put him in the mix as well. So that's the top four. Everyone else is kind of like bit players that kind of come along. Even Colossus, or Cold Boy there. To me, any one of these guys to me is like a secondary character, right? You can't have too many characters that are the top characters. Otherwise, you get characteritis. To me, right? So there are co-protagonists. A good example of that is in Star Trek. If you guys are Trek people, I'm a Trekker, right? And for me, the big three is like, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, right? Those are the big three, right? Back in the old Star Trek, right? The other ones, Scotty, Chekhov, all the other characters that are in Star Trek, they're, secondary characters that played an important role, right? And sometimes they got in trouble. Like, I don't know how many times Chekhov got beat up in the old Star Trek, and so did, Sulu, because between Chekhov and Sully, they got beat up all the time. They got beat up. They got their brains changed. They become evil characters. All kinds of bad stuff happened to those people. Even and sometimes Scotty, bad things happened to him. But really, from all these characters, and the guys, of course, all the guys in the red shirts. The red shirts were like the guys who all died, right? They're all the secondary characters. But co-protagonists, you can't have more than a few, right? 2, 3 characters that are really co-protagonists. A good example of that would be in TV, I would look at Arrow as a good example. You've got your big 3, right? You've got Arrow, you've got Computer Girl, and you've got his bodyguard. Those are the big 3 in Arrow, right? No problem. And in Flash, it's the same thing. You've got Cisco, right? You've got what's her name, Snow, the other scientist, right? His partner, right? And then you've got the Flash, right? But in the Flash, you also have the Flash's stepfather. You have the Flash's girlfriend, love interest. You have all these different people, but they're all like kind of main characters. So again, when it gets too crazy, and for me, some of it happened with Heroes. I don't know if you guys ever saw this TV show. It was on in the early 2000s, right? It's called Heroes. Actually, they're making a comeback with it. It was good. It would start off really, really cool, and then it got to be crazy, right? Because there was too many of these goddamn heroes that would come up, and you couldn't keep track of all the different kinds of heroes, right? It was too much. It was characteritis. They suffer from this. It's almost like a disease that happened to these guys. Entourage was a good example of it. If you guys ever watched Entourage on TV, again, the heroes of Entourage was the main hero and his compadres, his entourage, his buddy, right? Co-protagonists. And then we talked about supporting characters like sidekicks and secondary characters that would come in to help out. So you need to have those kind of things as well. Now, how do you incorporate that stuff in video games? Well, again, co-characters would be things like guys that play with you, like in a multiplayer environment is a good example. They gave MMO as an example. Supporting characters would be like NPCs or hirelings. If you can get NPCs or hirelings, or when you get a power-up in the game, if you're playing an action-type game, and you get a second ship. That's a supporting character equivalent, or supporting avatar. Here's where we're getting into a little bit more of structure, and this is where I get really excited, because I mean, I'm excited about story and character and everything else, but this stuff here is the true Hollywood ending kind of idea, right? And I say it in a bit of with a bit of a snicker, but because the Hollywood formula has been really successful over the last, I would say, 60 or 70 years, right? So let's talk about it a little bit. 3 parts to your story, right? That they always talk about. I actually learned this in school too. Beginning, middle, and end. It sounds stupid, right? You're like, of course there's a big beginning, and middle, and end. Really? Not for some people. For some people, they don't understand story, and even if you watch a movie, you don't know where the thing begins and where it ends. And sometimes, you know what, the beginning and the end and the middle, they're all mixed mashed together, and it's a non-linear story. And those are the type of stories that are interesting, but are very difficult to watch, right? Who can name a non-linear story that's been presented lately? There's tons of them that have come out lately. Can you remember a non-linear story? Not something that happens in sequence. A story out of sequence, where you see a little bit of the future, then it goes back to the past, then it goes to they kind of shift back and forth. What was that? Yeah, well, there's tons. There's tons and tons. Non-linear storytelling, right?
The one with the guy that has tattoos.
That's the one, Memento, right? Memento is a great example of that, where he remembers the past, and and then he goes back and he's looking at he can't remember who he is because he's got the disease that he forgets, so he tattoos everything on his body. Great idea. Non-linear storytelling. Again, audience, non-linear storytelling from this much goes down to this much. Why? Because, I mean, again, you're trying to target your audience, and the biggest audience is this audience right here, guys. Beginning, middle, and end. If you can provide a story in beginning, middle, and end for your video game, although it won't be as exciting as a non-linear story, it's a lot easier to finish, right? Here's a thing to do. Try this. And again, I like to look at this. Over the next few things we're going to be talking about, a few slides, probably the most important pieces I'm going to talk about this semester for storytelling, okay? And I want you to try and do this. Take cue cards, right? And write a story with your cue cards, right? Try this out. Any story you want. Write your 12, there's 12 pieces to this story, this hero's journey. Take cue cards, write them out, right? And kind of use the beginning, middle, and end as a wireframe for your story, all right? To hang your story elements on, right? And see if you can actually finish your story. Because I'll tell you, this is the most difficult part of any writer, any video game designer, is coming up with what the big finish is going to be, right? And you know what they tell you? Have the big finish in mind first. Think about what your boss monster is going to be. And if it's not exciting, don't bother. Don't write any of it. Stop. Don't write the story at all. Don't write the video game. Don't write the movie. Don't write anything. If you can't come up with a really cool finish, forget it. Start with the end in mind is one of the things they tell you about if you want to be really successful. See you later. No, you can watch it later if you want. So again, what do you do in the beginning? A couple things to do is we're going to talk about this 3-act plot structure that we talked about here. This is the 3-act plot structure, beginning, middle, and end, right? 3 acts. Actually, it comes back from playwriting before, right? They also had a 2-act structure, Act 1 and Act 2, and then they moved into this 3-act structure as we learn how to tell stories, beginning, middle, and end. And then some of these acts were also split off. The beginning had 2 acts, Act 1 and 2. Beginning of the middle of the beginning of the beginning, the middle of the beginning, and the end of the beginning. And then they thought about this as we got into writing more complicated stories. They figured like this: every chapter should have a beginning, middle, and an end. Okay, now let's go back. Every scene should have a beginning, middle, and an end. All right, cool. Every character should have a beginning, middle, and an end. And if you can do that, if you can weave all that into your story, it becomes more complex and more interesting. That's what they're trying to say. So let's look at that. So if you think about it, if I look at the whole story, it's got a beginning, middle, and an end. And then this first part, Act 1, which is the beginning. I have the beginning of the beginning, right? And in that first few minutes, right, in order for us to be caught, what do they say? The first 10 pages of your story, if you want to sell your story, are the most important pages. Because you know what? If I don't read awesome stuff in the first 10 pages, I'm not going to read the rest of the book, right? And the other thing that people do is this. They read the last page. Whoever does that in a book, you kind of pick it up and then read the last page. And they do that, you know why? Because you want to, if it's not really cool, if it's not great, sometimes people don't pick up the book and they don't read it at all. They put it back on the shelf, man, right? Because the last page is really, really important. But it's okay to know the last page because you want to see how you get there. And especially if it becomes, if it's an awesome ending. Here's the other one. How many people hate spoilers? They hate people who tell them the story. You're watching a movie with somebody, or you want to play the video game, but you hate it. You hate spoilers. You hate people telling you what's going to happen. Who hate that? You're one of these. But you read the last page, right? You're the same guy that reads the last page. But you hate people. If someone else tells you it, you hate it. If someone else tells you the story, you hate it. You want to kill them.
Someone telling me the spoiler and reading the last page of the book.
Because you read the last page of the book, right? Someone didn't tell you the end of the story. You read it, right? And that's the reason why we don't mind that. Same reason why we don't mind walkthroughs. Who does walkthroughs when they play video games? I want to play a video game. I want to do a walkthrough. Why bother, right? You're just going to go through and read somebody else's journey that they figured out all the secrets to power up your character to be the most powerful character by playing the video game, by reading a walkthrough, right? It's crazy. Or get the cheat codes for your video game so that way, you don't have a carry limit in Oblivion, right? These are bad things. Whoever does that anyway, right? But at the end of the day, right, what we're trying to say is that traditional story structure is really, really cool. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the great thing about the beginning, middle, and the end is they tell you in the beginning who the character is. So this is the stuff to remember for your exam. Who is the character in the beginning? Who is what's their conflict? Who is their enemy? You should know that within the first 10 minutes, right? And then maybe an inkling as to how they're going to get there. If you don't have those story elements in the first 10 minutes or so, many people say that you'll lose your audience. Let's talk about 2 more things. Joseph Campbell wrote this idea of the hero's journey, and he wrote The Hero with 1,000 Faces, right? Someone else came out and took, based on Joseph Campbell's work, and I really respect this guy. His name is Christopher Vogler, right? He came out with something called The Writer's Journey, right? And I think it's a great book. If you're interested in writing, if you're interested in any kind of story element at all, buy his book or get his book. It's available through iTunes, and it's available through different ways of getting it, right? The Writer's Journey is a great book, and it really talks story. If you're someone who ever wants to be a writer or ever interested in doing film or anything like that, The Writer's Journey is the way to go. I've got 2 versions. The latest version is the best version. So let's talk about this a little bit. The beginning, again, you start off, you kind of, there's something called this backstory. Who knows what the backstory is? Let's talk about that a little bit, just as a review. Kevin, what's a backstory? The backstory. When I say backstory, what do I mean by it? I like that, and almost like if I don't know who you are, right? So tell me a little bit about your backstory. Tell me where you grew up. Where'd you grow up, Kevin? Nigeria. By chance, I didn't even know that when I said Nigeria. That was really true. It was actually when I talked about Sense8, it was made. I don't know if you've ever seen that show, but the guy's from Nigeria, right? And they say, "Oh, you're from Africa," and he laughed at them, right? Because everyone thinks Nigeria is suddenly Africa. Anyways, but at the end of the day, right? In Nigeria, what are the stuff that you what are the kind of the conflicts that you faced in Nigeria? Name me one conflict. Anything, whatever you want to talk about. Tell me about a conflict, something that caused you trouble. Anything, personal, something else, something that any conflict that you want to share that caused you that give you trouble in Nigeria. Anything at all? How about heat? Was it hot there? Heat is, I mean, I'm sure it's hot in Nigeria, right? What was that? You miss the heat now. I miss the heat now too, man. I'm from Greece, and even though they have lots of financial troubles, it's right now it's like 30 degrees there, and Nigeria is even hotter, right? But that's the problem. That can be a conflict, right? Because imagine if you don't have, in some places you don't have enough water, right? Water is a trouble, or sometimes it gets too hot, people die, right? In India, that's happening right now, right? India, there's like 40 degree, 50 degree temperatures in India right now. That's a conflict, right? That could be part of the character's backstory. Imagine if you came from a region where there was no water or not enough water, and then that kind of made you, that strengthened you somehow because you could survive without it, right? That's the kind of idea for the backstory. Backstory is about where you came from, where the character came from, what made the character who he is right now in the normal world, in the ordinary world. That's the backstory. Backstory is not just for character though, or for the protagonist. It's also for the villains, right, or the antagonists of the story. If you create a really cool backstory for the antagonists, the villains of the story, it's awesome because what ends up happening is you have a truer conflict than if you're just doing a backstory for the hero. All right, so you understand, in the beginning we learn about the hero, we learn about the hero's world, and we get to know what the problem is. In the middle, we talk about the hero's. He finds out about what obstacles are happening for himself, right? And he gets tested. That's what happens in the middle of the story. And then he also kind of has the first fight, the first encounter, if you will, with the big bad guys. That happens in the middle of the story, right? By the end wraps up the story, right? And basically allows the hero to win, right? That's really what happens at the end of the day, right? Now, sometimes the win isn't a clean win. Sometimes people die by the end or whatever. Sometimes the hero dies by the end, but that could be a win as well, right? But there's got to be some way that it wraps up the problem. Whatever the problem was that was presented at the beginning of the story has to really be wrapped up by the end. If it's not wrapped up by the end, you've got a problem. And the story might only, again, when we talk about audience, it might only kind of like, be interesting for only a small portion of the audience if the hero at the end of the day doesn't win, okay? So it's better from a common story element perspective to make a story where the hero can win or there is a win, something that's wrapped up by the end. Again, this is traditional, I'll say formulaic story writing we're talking about here, right? You might argue, if you're a story writer, that this kind of story writing sucks. I don't want to see a movie that always wraps up nicely by the end, right? But at the end of the day, it's what sells the most. Me too, but it's got to be good. So here's the story structure that I want you to take away for the exam. All right, if you're going to when we talk about the exam, I think these are the main stories. We talk about the hero's journey. It comes right out of Christopher Vogler's book, The Hero's Journey. Obviously, we can't read the whole thing, but they kind of our book here takes an element or an excerpt out of that book and writes it here, and it talks about the 12 stages of the hero's journey. Right. So in the first stage, I'll summarize it for you. the hero is in the ordinary world, right? Before he's been given the call to adventure, all right? He could be an ordinary, in his ordinary life. Neo is a great example of that. He's in his desk job as part of the ordinary world. He's bored. He knows there's something greater than himself. He knows he's been hearing whispers of the Matrix for a while now, right? He gets the call to adventure for the very first time, part of the essence of the call, from Trinity when she meets him in the club, right? And introduces him to Morpheus. Morpheus truly gives him the call to adventure, right? Morpheus gives him the call. Now remember, in the beginning, when Trinity gives him the call, right, he refuses the call. And most of the times, we have this refusal of the call. An example of that would be, hey man, listen, we gotta fight. And the hero might have doubts, right? He might sit there and go, I don't know if I can do it. And no, I don't feel like doing it. I've retired. I'm a retired hero. I don't do that kind of stuff anymore. Get somebody else. No, I'm not gonna do it. This makes it really, again, I say it's formulaic, but you'll see it in so many stories like that. What? I can't leave like Tatooine. I can't leave it. I got my friends here. That's what Luke Skywalker was saying, right? And he was almost like a little crybaby. If you watch Star Wars Episode 4, right, A New Hope, right, he was saying that I can't do that. I got to take care of my moisture farm. Come on, I can't go and fight the Empire. Are you kidding me? Right? He said no. Finally, he meets the mentor, right, and the mentor, whether he meets him after the call, refusal of the call, or whether he meets him before the refusal of the call. The mentor is the one that's going to help him, right, take this journey. Okay, right now, if you look at this little wheel here, right, from about 1, right, to about 4, this is Act 1. This is the beginning. These 4 first pieces, the ordinary world, the hero's call to adventure, the refusal of the call, which is really super important, right, the meeting with the mentor, and then this. This is the threshold right here. And this is where you meet the threshold guardian. This is the stuff where you get your first tests, right? And sometimes, you know what, if the hero refuses the call enough, right, the story has to conspire to push the hero into the story. And a good example of that is when Luke's family is killed in Star Wars, right? I hate to use Star Wars references. Or when, there's no going back. This is the turning point. It's something that happens because he refuses the call, and once he refuses the call, you know what, bad things are going to happen. Especially if he refuses, in the classic Greek literature, if the hero refuses the call 3 times, right, that magic number, bad things will happen to him to prove to him that he should have gone on that journey in the first place, right? And sometimes he's pushed into the journey. A good example of that in the Matrix is once he takes that pill, he can't go back. He's done, right? When Luke's family is burned by the stormtroopers, he can't go back. He's pushed across the threshold into that new world that he doesn't know anything about, right? As soon as he's pushed across the threshold, he meets some new people. He met, Han Solo, right, inside Mos Eisley Spaceport. Look, it goes exactly like this, right? This is funny. This is why, Joseph Campbell basically said that George Lucas, who made Star Wars, if it wasn't for him, George Lucas would have made Star Wars the way he made it, because he followed the hero's journey, right? So he meets Han Solo, he meets Chewbacca, and then they escape from Mos Eisley Spaceport, and now they've got their first test, right? Their first test is getting out of off of Tatooine, right? Finally, when they approaches the innermost cave in Star Wars is when they approach the Death Star for the first time, right? They need to save the princess, and the princess is on the Death Star, right? And they've got no choice. They wanted to run away from the spaceport, right? And you know what? Han Solo is also an anti-hero. He's also a helper. He has nothing to do. He wants nothing to do with the rebellion, right? It's a dangerous thing in that time to be a rebel, right? You're going to get chased down by the Empire. They have impossible weapons, the Death Star. They have the Star Destroyer, which is the biggest, baddest gunship in the universe, right? And they're going to shoot you down, man. You don't want to be part of the rebellion. And he knows this, Han Solo, right? So he doesn't want to do that. But you know what? The story conspires against them again and pushes them into the inner cave by going into the Death Star, right? They find out when the mentor hears all these people dying when they first test the Death Star out and destroy Princess Leia's world, right? And as soon as they destroy that world, thousands of voices cry out, that Obi-Wan hears. And that's why they see all this debris and they push themselves to see this, this moon that sits there. And then, the classic line, that's no moon, and they get to the Death Star, right? So that's what happens in step 7 here. The ordeal. They have to get out of the Death Star. They've gone into the Death Star. They need to escape. And, this whole thing with the trash compactor, they get stuck in the trash compactor in the bowels of the beast, if you will, right? And then they finally make it out. And the same time they make it out of there, as they're fighting the trash compactor, between here and here, right, as they're moving towards, and by the way, you could see this approach to the innermost cave and the ordeal happening again and again in Star Wars, almost as different little tests. One is the Death Star, and the next one, of course, is defeating the Death Star by blowing it up, by going back with all his friends and allies to defeat the Death Star. Seizing the sword or getting the reward. Again, the reward in the Death Star sequence, the first Death Star sequence, when he goes there the first time and Darth Vader kills Obi-Wan Kenobi, is Princess Leia. He gets Princess Leia and escapes back to the rebellion, right? That's this part. And they repeat it again. This is the thing that he does again. Lucas does for the second time. He repeats this whole thing again when he goes back to the Death Star to blow it up. And the way he does that, the ordeal for him is fighting Darth Vader ship to ship. When Darth Vader has the other kind of TIE fighter that comes behind him, right? And he's like, I'm on the leader, right? And he's going to try and kill Luke Skywalker. And because of his friends, right, Han Solo that he made back here in Enemies and Allies, right, he was able to overcome Darth Vader because Han Solo comes back with the Millennium Falcon, blasts Darth Vader out of the way, and lets Luke finish his journey to take up the sword, right? Okay, after that, it's the road back. And sometimes the road back in some things happen very, very quickly. Like in Star Wars, it happens very fast, the road back. You see him, use the Force, Luke. He's coming back after he's defeated the Death Star. And it's kind of funny because, I don't know if you've ever seen this part. Watch it again. If you ever watched Star Wars, the original one, once he's done blowing up the Death Star, he does a little bit of a bob. His whole ship is kind of bobbing. And it's almost like the whole ship is breathing with him when he's like defeated the Death Star. Check it out. You'll see it. The whole ship kind of bobs up and down when he's done fighting. And he's breathing on the way back. And then, of course, the hero comes out of it and he's reborn. He's no longer what he used to be. He's resurrected into this new being, this superhero, if you will. He's come through the eye of the storm and back out of it and become something greater than what he was before. And now he's the master of both worlds, or he returns with the elixir, right? And that's what Luke Skywalker is in the first one. He's hailed as a hero. He goes to the ceremony. They pat him on the back, and he's the hero. In the Matrix, he flies at the end. Remember, he's able to finally understand the Matrix, which happens around right here, the ordeal where he fights the Smiths, right? And once he defeats the Smiths, he's able to defeat the Matrix and make it out, right, back out to where he was. He's able to he learns about himself. He does exactly what the Oracle told him to do: know thyself, which is really what the Matrix is all about. The Matrix is all about Neo understanding what the real world is all about, right? If you think about it. So the hero's journey, this 12-step process, although you may think is formulaic, it's quite malleable, right? And again, a lot of people still use this kind of stuff. If you just, again, and some agents in Hollywood, they bring it down. They make fun of it. Like, for example, in Entourage, if you ever read that, it's all about making movies, right? They always talk about, if I'm going to get another one of those hero's journey scripts, I'm going to kill somebody, right? Ari says it all the time, Ari Gold, right? He just hates them. He wants something that's new, something that's different, or whatever. But at the end of the day, this is what sells, this right here. And if you make this as part of your video game, think about this. You create your ordinary world, a training area where the hero's going to understand what the big villain is, what the big boss man is going to be, right? You cross into your first test. Now you're really into the game, right? Now you've got your, whatever, before your training is done after this. After about step 6, your training is done. Now you're going to get your first challenge pretty much halfway through, right? And now you're going to go through the ordeal, and the ordeal might take several steps where you're going into a gauntlet, as an example, something where you have to keep going. Finally, when you get through the gauntlet, whatever that is, or a series of tests, then you can seize the sword, the princess, what have you, and then make the road back. Tolkien does it like that too. Think about Tolkien, how it's made. You got, the Fellowship of the Ring, as an example, the Two Towers, right, and the Return of the King. And if you think about it, it's this 12-step journey that he takes with Tolkien. Same thing with The Hobbit, right? The Hobbit starts off in Hobbiton, right? And then moves through his journey. He refuses the call. It's a great idea. Right? This is a perfect example of refusing the call, where Gandalf says, you're coming. And he says, no, no adventures for this Hobbit right here. And Gandalf carves the rune into his door, right? That forces Bilbo to go on the journey, whether he likes to or not. He refused the call. Gandalf, as his mentor, pushed him into the journey, whether he liked it or not. And this kind of stuff happens over and over again. So if you can remember these 12 steps, and we're going to talk about these 12 steps as we go throughout the course, right, here and there, these 12 steps are the ones that are going to be on your exam, right? So the idea is, and in order for you to remember this, I've got to give you an assignment, which is probably going to be the next thing I want to talk about after this. When you get back your review, we're going to talk about building your story, building your game idea, right? And doing it by using these 12 steps. That's funny, 12 steps. There's Alcoholics, 12 steps, Alcoholics Anonymous, and there's 12 steps of the hero's journey. And this is what we're going to take on this next assignment that you're going to get in assignment number 3. I could certainly continue on. I'm going to upload this to up on eCentennial for you. And there's some really good stuff here that we're going to talk about over and over again. I'm going to refer back to this ordinary world, the hero's ordinary world, the call to adventure, whether the hero accepts the call or not. The 12 steps, refusal of the call, again to recap, where the hero, he refused the call because for whatever reason, because he's uncomfortable, he doesn't want to do it, he doesn't think he's ready, he just doesn't want it, right? Meeting with the mentor when he receives this first information about the quest, whatever the quest is, and meeting with somebody who's going to help him out. When he crosses the first threshold, there's no turning back. He can't go back to the ordinary world anymore. Whether he goes over a cliff, through hyperspace, back through time, whatever it is, that he cannot go back when he crosses this first threshold, right? And then tests allies and enemies. And this is where people have problems running their Act 2 stuff. When they get into this Act 2 is always the weakest part, if you ever notice, of Act 2 and Act 3. Act 1, people do a great Act 1. I can write a great Act 1. But writing a great Act 2 and maintaining the momentum, right? Maintaining the momentum that we set up in Act 1. Remember, I'm setting up all these balls in motion. Remember we talked about setups and payoffs? I set up all this stuff in Act 1. I got to pay it off by Act 3. If I don't pay off everything that I set up in Act 1, the story is going to fall flat, right? We can talk about other things about story as well, about how action continues to rise and conflict continues to happen. Example of that was Mad Max, this latest Mad Max movie. You guys watch that? Non-stop action, right? Where the movie just doesn't stop. Your eyes are just like ready to pop out of your head if you're watching it in 3D, right? But the thing with this one is, and this is why I like Mad Max, it's just nonstop. For him, the hero's in trouble from the very first moment. He has no choice. He's getting like tattooed on his back, as part of this, as the credits are rolling, right? He's stuck on the front of this car that's going to collide, and he's going to die at any time, right? This is why I can watch this movie again and again. I can watch Mad Max, Fury Road, as many times as you want to see it, because it's that kind of crazy movie, right? And we've seen this kind of character before, right? Where he's gonna, you don't know what's gonna happen to him. He's stuck. The hero can't do anything for the first bit. He has no choice but to go across the threshold, and there's no turning back. His car that he's coveted over the last 3 movies has been destroyed, and this is the same car that he's kept. This V8, this crazy V8. There's actually a game made from this way back in the day when I was a kid called The Last V8. I don't know if you guys ever heard of this game, but it was a game, and other video games and role-playing games came out of Mad Max. Car Wars is what it was called, right? And where you had this post-apocalyptic future, and everyone just had this crazy-ass car that they would drive with these cultists. Well, they brought it back, and I love the fact that the same writers and director from the original series came back and wrote this one. But the thing is, this middle part is one of the biggest ones, the biggest problems to continue the momentum of the story. It's so hard to keep that momentum and so hard to write enough tests for the hero so that he's continuously challenged until the end. Because if you don't write enough tests, they get so bored. We get bored, right? We sit there and go like, well, the hero's like indestructible now, right? Think about writing, that's why Superman's such a hard story to tell, right? Because he's so indestructible. How can you make a villain that's more powerful than Superman? It's got to be just like Superman almost, right? Like someone from the Phantom Zone, right? Or Lex Luthor, who is really devious and smart. He's a regular human, but he's super, super smart, and he can outsmart Superman. Even Superman's not that smart, right? So that's kind of cool the way they did that. But the biggest part is having this overpowering force. In the beginning, when you make your video game, I want you to think about this. Make your video game so that the villains are indestructible. There's no way that the hero, you could ever think the hero can destroy them, right? And you should maintain that level of difficulty throughout the entire game. The entire game, right, should be to the point where you think the hero would think that there's no way he can defeat the villains. There's no way. A good example of that is Star Wars with The Empire Strikes Back, or with Matrix and the Agent Smith, who defeated Morpheus, but somehow, Neo was able to make it through, right? With those crazy flurry of punches that he was able to do to warp the Matrix, right? And Neo was so far away from that in the beginning, right? And the same thing with the Death Star. Luke Skywalker was this farm kid, but somehow he's able to go against the Death Star and blow it the hell up, right? It's impossible. There's no way that he should be able to defeat the enemy. Watch the next film. I really encourage you to do this. When you write your review, right? Think about this for your review when you write this. Is there story elements in there? Think about the game you're playing. If there's no story elements, are you ever going to play this game again? Right? And chances are, right, nowadays, the way we are right now, because there's so many video games out there for us to look at, if there's no story elements, or if it's very, very basic, you're going to play it, you're going to master it, and you're never going to go back to it. So that's part 2. The other thing that really people have a little bit of problem talking about is this approach to the innermost cave. It's called the approach to the innermost cave because think about an Empire Strikes Back where he goes into that cave. I forget if you guys have seen Empire Strikes Back. Star Wars, that's Star Wars Episode 5, right? Empire Strikes Back, where he goes to the innermost cave and he sees himself, right? Where he sees that it's almost like part of it was an oracle or, a premonition of who he's going to fight. I am your father at the end, right? It's Darth Vader, right? Luke sees himself when he blows up Darth Vader and he goes, no, it can't be. It can't be that it's me. It's almost like he's fighting himself, right? That's the ultimate, person that he's fighting. There's actually been a lot of movies like that where you're fighting your own clone, kind of idea. You're not just fighting another villain, you're fighting yourself, right? And it's an interesting idea of a story element. They talk about the ordeal, again, this big supervillain or whatever, or Superman and kryptonite. How can Superman overcome kryptonite? He's got to use his brain, not his brawn, right? That's the thing with Superman. Superman can get into this trap, and this is where I'd love to see a superhero movie, where the superhero, through the entire first part of the movie, he's just punching up the villains, no problem, and at the end, he gets defeated. I think a great superhero movie is something like The Incredibles. I don't know if you guys have ever seen The Incredibles, right? To me, Brad Bird did it right there for me, right? That he said, and he was the one. This is why Tomorrowland. I was really looking forward to Tomorrowland because Brad Bird, the same person who wrote The Incredibles, wrote Tomorrowland, right? So I'm thinking, hey, I want to see the same thing, man. I want to see this old superhero, right? The golden age of superheroes, how it went away, and now he's back, right? Incredibles. And it was a great story, right? And I think they did a really great job with it, right? Because you know what? He got arrogant. Mr. Incredible, right? No, stand back, miss. I'll be okay. And then, there's this little sidekick. The sidekick, he's ignoring the sidekick. And we think, what an annoying sidekick in the beginning. This is the villain, right? In the first 10 minutes of the film, we see the villain. The sidekick is going to be the villain. And you know what? It's this whole Batman Joker thing. And if anything, Mr. Incredible created that villain. Just like Batman was created by the Joker, which created Batman, kind of thing. Back and forth. Joker created Batman, or maybe Batman created the Joker. We don't know. It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, right? And it's the same kind of idea with this whole thing. It's like, the ordeal is the superhero has to overcome his superhero-ness. That would be great if you can see a movie like that. It's not about being super. It's about being a man. It's about being a person. It's about understanding who you are. It's about know thyself, so you can overcome the kryptonite. Because it's always going to be kryptonite for every one of us. It doesn't matter who you are, how powerful you become. You can become the CEO of a company. Your kryptonite is going to come out one day, right? And you need to overcome it. Maybe it's going to be family. Maybe it's going to be health. Maybe it's going to be something. Kryptonite's coming, guys, right? And then you get your reward. And the reward is it happens, again, it marks, like it says, the end of Act 2, right? But this is where the denouement happens for sometimes. You get your reward, and then the hero doesn't know where to go from there. The story doesn't know where to go. It kind of, if you talk too much, you ever notice how as soon as the hero defeats the villain, the credits roll nowadays. There's nothing else after. There's no road back. It's done in most Hollywood movies these days. Why? Because it's a denouement. It's almost like we've got action, 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 and then there's no more action, and it's over, and now we're talking backstory, and now it's like it falls flat at the end. Because you know what? We've just been given all this action. We want to see more action at the end, and it's hard to get that. It's hard to give that powwow stuff. Incredibles did it great because, they had, I'm the Underminer, and I'm going to come against you. It's like, hey, where's part 2? I want to see part 2 of The Incredibles. And they came together finally as a family at the end. That was being master of both worlds. That's why Incredibles is such a great movie, right?
They're doing a second.
I hear that. Hopefully Brad Bird will overcome what he did in Tomorrowland and do a really, really good Incredibles, because I think that's a great story. And just to end it off, sometimes what ends up happening is the hero has to die and be reborn, right? And a good example of that is Luke Skywalker, right? In Act 2 of the trilogy, which was Empire Strikes Back, Darth Vader chops his arm off, right? And actually, if anything, if you look at Act 1, 2, and 3, or Part 1, 2, and 3 of the Star Wars, the sequel, the prequels, if you will, right? Well, we know that Darth Vader himself got his arm chopped off, right? So it's almost like it's ironic that he's doing it again to his own son, right? And at that point you see Luke, he's died, right? Han Solo dies also in this movie, right? In Empire Strikes Back, he gets frozen in carbonite, right? And then in Return of the Jedi, he gets brought back to life, right? So sometimes what happens is, and it's a really effective, I would say, archetype or meme, is for the hero to die and become reborn. In the Matrix, in fact, he dies in the Matrix at the end, right? And then he gets up again. He becomes reborn. He is he's out of the real world. He's fighting the Smiths, and somehow he comes alive. He realizes what this thing is all about. He figures it out, right? That he's, how to control the Matrix. So dying and reborn is another big theme that happens in a lot of successful stories. And then, of course, this idea of, and it's really huge here, but I put it in here for you guys to see. It's everything from the book because it's really, really important. He returns home, but is forever changed. This idea of him returning home and being the master of both worlds. Marty McFly from Back to the Future, right? Have you guys seen Back to the Future? No? If you haven't seen Back to the Future, you got to see it. It's a great movie. And the other one that I really suggest you watch again is The Princess Bride. I like to talk about The Princess Bride a lot because it's a great example of story. And you know what? Who is the protagonist? Who is the hero in The Princess Bride? If you think about it, it's not the Princess Bride, right? It's the Dread Pirate Roberts. It's the guy who we see, Wesley, our young Wesley, who is just a farmer, and then he goes off. And actually, if you actually read Robert Silverberg's book, The Princess Bride, right, it's a very interesting book. And it's actually, I like the movie a lot better because it's put together very, very nicely. Anyway, at the end of the day, what I want you to remember before we get into the next piece, which is story elements, I'm not going to talk about that today, is these 12 steps. If you can take anything away from this, believe me, when I read The Writer's Journey, it's something that changed my life as a designer, right? I always try and think about things. I know you might think this is nuts. I make a website, beginning, middle, and end. I think about that. When your user goes to look at the website for the first time, there's got to be a call to adventure for him. There's got to be a reason why he's going to press that button, right, to see the next page. If the website's boring and doesn't drag your user in, right, he's not going to go to it again, right? It's got to be beginning, middle, and end. And the middle has to be meaty, man. The end has to be for a website. There has to be some kind of connection with the user. And this beginning, middle, and end, if you take this to the next level, and if you bring it down granularly to each scene of your video game, right, it's going to produce a better video game. Okay, so that's it for me for this week. I think that's all I want to talk about with this chapter. There's other things that are in the book that I put in the PowerPoints that I'm not going to talk about, that I'm not going to test you on, but I am, and I think there's some good reading there for you, but I am going to talk about this monomyth and the hero's journey. This is the one thing I want you to take away from this chapter for the exam.